Hey, Group Talk listener, Jason here, Group Talk producer. Our Group Talk podcast is growing in listenership, and we have exciting news for you listeners. Starting April 6th, we are launching the Group Talk network of podcasts. Don't worry, we'll still have your favorite shows, favorite hosts, and favorite topics. They'll just be on their own separate channel. And they'll be available wherever you choose to listen to your podcast. And best of all, we will be expanding and offering some very exciting new resources to help equip you in your ministry. Because a great network is made of great people like you. Hi, welcome to Here to Then, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Hi, everyone. Happy summer. It is June, and you know what that means. Time to start planning for the fall new small group season, which is challenging most years, but after 2+ years of COVID, many of our ministries and our churches are facing a season of rebuilding, which means that we need to recruit more leaders than ever before. And so if you have already finished your planning and you have all the leaders you could possibly need for fall, then I'm super jealous. And this episode is probably not for you. But if you're like me and it's a little daunting to think about all the new group leaders that we're going to need this fall, then I hope you'll stay tuned. For this month, I pulled from the archives one of the most helpful conversations we've had on this topic of identifying and recruiting leaders. It was a panel discussion that we taped at the Lobby Conference in March of 2019 with small group pastors Bill Search, Mark Kendall, and Tommy Carrera, 3 different size churches in 3 different states with 3 different small group models. I think you'll find it helpful. We've had an honest conversation about the issues related to leader recruitment, including the challenges of getting new leaders for groups, the common obstacles that we face, how to overcome them, figuring out what are the minimum qualifications we need for a leader, depending on your church culture and organization, and then also examining the pros and cons of the various leader recruiting strategies like host, apprenticing, connection events, campaign, and group planting. So we hope you'll find this conversation encouraging, and hopefully you'll pick up some nuggets to try this summer as you invite people to say yes to leading a group. Welcome to Group Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Taketa. I'm the host and the small groups pastor at Calvary Community Church in Westlake Village, California. Well, we are doing a special Group Talk episode today because we're taping live from the Small Group Network Lobby Conference in San Juan Capistrano, California. And I have the privilege of hosting a panel discussion with 3 friends from the network. And we're going to talk about one of the top 3 things every small group pastor is always concerned about, regardless of church size, regardless of what time of ministry, regardless of really anything. How do we get new group leaders? So we're going to discuss strategies to identify and recruit new leaders. And it is a felt need that we all have. I know I have it. And hopefully this conversation will be helpful to you. So I'm excited to learn along with you, with our guests today, who'll be sharing insights from their various experiences. So I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves briefly and tell us your name, your church, where you're located, and how long you've been serving in small groups ministry. You start with you, Mark.
My name is Mark Kendall. I have been in small group ministry for about 27 years. I'm at a church in the Twin Cities, Eden Prairie, Minnesota, Grace Church, and been there 7.5 years. And I'm so glad to be here today in Southern California.
Wow. You do like the sign here. Yes. All right. And you, Tommy?
My name is Tommy. I serve as the Groups and Care Director at Mission Church in Ventura, California, and I'm really used to the sun, but I'm still thankful for it. I've been there about almost 6 years now.
Okay, great.
And I'm Bill Search. I've served a handful of churches around the country. Right now, I serve as executive pastor of ministries at Crossings Community Church in Oklahoma City, and I've written a couple books on small groups.
And you're too modest to mention the books. So the first one was Simple Small Groups. And that was one of the first books I read in small groups ministry. And then you've written a recent book in 2017 called The Essential Guide for Small Group Leaders, which is a terrific resource for new leaders. So, which makes sense because we're talking about new leaders.
Thank you.
So thank you all for being here. Now, I know whenever we gather, like at the lobby conference that we're at, one of the top questions that comes up all the time is, hey, how do you get new leaders? How does your church do it? What works? What doesn't? So before we dive into kind of nuts and bolts of that, let's start here. why is it so difficult to get new group leaders? Why do you think that? What are some barriers for that? Jump in.
I'll be brave. I will start because I know a lot about what makes it difficult, because it always seems to be difficult for me. Honestly, one of the things that I run into a lot of times is somebody's willingness, not actually somebody's willingness, that's another problem. But the first thing is usually somebody's own vision of their own capability. So they don't feel prepared. They don't feel adequate enough. We serve a lot of people that are coming back to the church for the first time or coming to Jesus for the first time. And they're like, I don't know the answers. I'm a mess. I can't help somebody else who's a mess. That's not, and it's very me focused, but that's because the me that they see is not somebody that's capable of helping anybody else. So that's one of the things that I run into, and it's a great pastoral moment and an opportunity to speak into what makes somebody adequate. And it's not knowledge. It's not answers. It's not always these skills. It's actually their trajectory toward Jesus and their own experiences. And they're just actually heart for people. Not, they're not as much about their skills, because skills can be trained. So it's a great pastoral moment, but often the first ask is a no because they're not ready. But it's the first in a line of no's that eventually, hopefully, leads to yes. But that's something I run into a lot.
Yeah. And Mark, we were talking a little bit earlier about how you have to develop a thick skin because you hear a lot of no's.
We get a lot of no's, and that's the one thing going into it. People, I think the biggest obstacle is their time. People are so busy. They're busy with family, kids, life, and their priorities, is important. All that's important, but it's the time factor. And for them to do one more thing.
Right.
And so that's it. It's a challenge, but we keep asking. We just keep asking. And once somebody comes to me and says, hey, I think they would make a small group leader, even if they say no, they're in a file. And I'm just going to keep coming back to them and let the Holy Spirit work on them and really encourage them that you are going to miss a blessing to be a part of this. And so time is kind of a big factor.
And Bill, let me ask you this. You've been in ministry a long time and in different environments, especially around the country. Do you think this is dependent on how our culture has moved away from Bible-based thinking, moved away from, so that it's harder to ask for commitment to the church? I
love that question. I've served in Louisville, Kentucky, and Sacramento, California. Two very different environments. Buckle of the Bible Belt to I can't spell Bible, and and it's the same problem in both places.
Okay,
it really is. And I think what was already mentioned here is spot on. I think people feel inadequate. They don't know if they can do it. I think that there's a huge time crunch. I also think it's a problem of our own making sometimes, because the way that we talk about small groups and articulate it, sometimes we'll talk people out of even participating, much less signing up to lead. So there's this tension between talking about small groups as this life-changing thing. Well, now I have to be someone's personal Dr. Phil. That's a lot of pressure. Or we talk about it as this massive disciple-making endeavor, and now I have to be the Apostle Peter or the Apostle Paul. And so when we get up front and we sort of overpromise the thing, really at its core, we're talking about helping people forge some spiritual friendships in a structured way. And if we can somehow communicate it that doesn't freak people out, I think that will help them. But it is a problem, I think, of our own making, out of our own zeal, maybe out of our own theology. But oftentimes we just lift the thing up so much that we talk people out of it.
Yeah, I've run into that exact thing because, and I have a great lead pastor who is really good at getting behind the thing, behind the issue. And I talk a lot about how, we need to create a better culture of groups. And he just I was doing this in a meeting once, and it was with other people too. So he was really poking hard at me. It was like, do you really want a culture of groups, or do you want a culture of life-changing relationships? And he kept doing that over and over. He's like, groups can't be the goal, because what if they leave and aren't in a church that has groups? They still need the same relationship. He kept pushing on that. And then I started to realize, if my goal for people too is to get good enough or whatever enough to be a group leader, that's still not a great goal. I need somebody to be great at influencing the people that they're in relationship with and making an impact on them. And so for me, it's been recently changing the ask. Instead of do you want to be a group leader? And behind that question for me has always been, do you want to do a bunch of stuff for a bunch of people that don't actually commit back to you what you've committed to them. Do you want to do that? And that's a really easy answer. It's just no. So I've been trying to change the ask and go, hey, do you want to, in the community that you're in, and in the relationship that you're in, even the group you're in, do you want to be trained and equipped to have the maximum impact with the influence that you have? And that's like, oh, yeah, I do want to do that. And so hopefully it helps. It's new for me.
I also think that what happens is when we say, hey, I'd love you to be a group leader, the word leader automatically, I'm not a leader. I can't do this. And the old model was we were looking for people that could teach. We're not looking for teachers and necessarily not a great leader, but they are leading somebody. And so I think that terminology does factor in. I'm not a leader. I can't do this. Yes, you can, and just sometimes changing that phraseology will make a difference, even in the presentation. Hey, can you come alongside people? They're a great encourager. They have some spiritual depth to them that they can impart on other people. And so, just having that type of expression to them makes a big difference.
So do you call them something else, Mark? You don't call them leaders?
Yes, of course we call them leaders, but we try to define what that is.
Okay.
We don't want them to say you are the ultimate leader. You're not the ultimate Bible. You might not be the smartest person in the room, but you are going to be in a leadership role in what that looks like. So defining that is important, but right off the bat, they might not feel like they could do that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We've played around with calling them facilitators, calling them other things, and I know this is a conversation that people have. And then we decided to go with leader after a while because we realized that we were asking them to spiritually shepherd a couple people. And for that, we needed a certain amount of maturity and which brings us to the next point, is one of some of the barriers, you talked about some of them are being self-imposed, Bill, are some of them like our context or our church imposed for us in terms of getting new leaders? Or is that because we require certain things that maybe we don't need to require, we do? What are some structural kind of limitations or barriers that could exist for getting new leaders?
Well, church leadership, and by leadership I mean whether that governance is the senior pastor or an eldership or deacons, whatever is kind of the group of people that set tone and trajectory, mission, and so forth for the church, they're going to establish. It doesn't really matter what at our level we care about. That's the level that's going to set the tone of what is required of a leader. So in some churches, they're going to say, well, you're going to have a very high bar. In order to serve as a leader, you have to fit the qualifications of deacon as outlined by Paul in 1 Timothy and in Titus. Or they might say you have to be able to be almost ordained, or you at least have to pass this sort of level of biblical understanding. You have to be a member or what have you. The church will establish that sort of deal, which will then maybe eliminate or alienate some people who are interested in leadership. Even if they qualify, they might go, well, I don't want to go that far. And some churches will say, well, no, we don't care about that. We'll take a risk on people. You just have to behave and be a halfway decent person and be willing to open up your home. So every church context and culture is going to set that. And that's where that to me is a starting place when you start looking at who can qualify, who can't qualify, what are those sorts of guidelines, because each church will be different in that regard.
Right, that's a good point. So let's dive into what is your main process that's worked for you, whether at your current environment or previous environment, for getting new leaders?
I know for us, going to a church that really didn't have small group ministries, and to start a small group ministry, you're looking for people that can fill that void quickly. But unfortunately, it takes a while to develop people that can fill that role. So we actually went with a host model where anybody could lead a group of their own friends. We provided the guardrails, we provided the curriculum, we provided, here's what we want you to do, the answers for the leaders. So it was anybody could do that. Now, some people would say, and even people within our own church, they couldn't believe I'd even present that because they were brought up all the what ifs. Wonder if you have some heretics doing this. And I said, hey, they've got the study, but they're inviting their own heretic friends, and so they could do this. We didn't send anybody to those groups.
Right.
They were
That's
self-imposed. Yes. So we let let them have that freedom. Now, on the back end, if they wanted to continue, we'd come alongside of them. That helped us when we didn't have enough people that could lead a group, and we had to do that for a couple of years. Thankfully, we don't now, but it filled the gap. So we were looking at different methods to find leaders. Now, we have processes and not just stuck on one way.
Yeah. What about you, Tommy?
Yeah, for a long time, the type of leader I was looking for was dependent on the results that I wanted from our groups, which it makes perfect sense. If you want people to be friends, then you need people that can help people be friends. And if you want people to be incredibly mature disciples, you need people that can help create that. And it depends on what you're aiming for. For a long time, the main goal that we were aiming for was for people to have spiritual friendships. And so people I was looking for mostly were people with great hospitality, willing to open their lives and their homes, but then also fit within some of the guardrails of like, they're not going to, because we were sending people to their groups, so they were safe people. And they were also, we were saying like, you also don't need to comment on this. And you also don't need to like, maybe don't set policy on these theological issues, right? Just maintain this idea of like, we're aiming for spiritual friendships, we're going for things together. And so that was what we did for a long time. And it was a lot based on personality and trajectory. So it was easy to take risks on people and then train them up to be better at helping people follow Jesus more closely. But I was realizing that there was this cap on what we were doing there, because if we wanted like groups to be the place where people can kind of maximize their efforts in following Jesus together, then just this pure hospitality kind of feel wasn't going to produce that. And so what we've moved toward recently is kind of a new model where, and this is vulnerable for me because I literally just finished my first round of it. So
this is a safe place. Tell us how it worked.
Safe place for all the
Tell us how it really worked, though.
Well, I don't know yet. That's the worst part.
That's a good disclaimer. We do not know.
It's great on paper. Well, I don't. Maybe it's
great on paper,
anyway,
as are many church model
things.
things.
Enough prefacing for myself. But so what I did was like created a 5-week event called Group Launch, where like you come and no groups exist. I invited some leaders to be leaders, but I didn't ever tell them their job description. Which was funny because I didn't actually have it written yet, because I was like, I got to land in the right place. Anyway, so this 5-week thing, everybody starts as a group link style of like nobody's in a group. And by the end of the first night of the 5 weeks, they've all formed groups. Okay. Some by stage of life, some are these beautiful mixes of generations and everything. And it was great. All the groups formed really well. And all I told the leaders was, you've got a red dot on your name tag. Try not to start the forming process with another red dot. And if it ends up that 2 leaders are in a group, you're going to have a great group. But some of them also won't have leaders then, because had 14 leaders or sets of leaders and 15 groups were formed. And so some had doubles and some didn't have leaders. And then I was like, well, now what do? We have this void of leadership in some of those groups, but they got off to a beautiful start, because everybody started taking ownership of the experience together. And so by the end of it, kind of figured out, instead of them nominating their leader, I think in a lot of times, at least in a group link style, you hear everybody's story, you get to know everybody, and then the group nominates the leader.
Right.
And that stressed me out, because I was literally watching one of those groups function, and the facilitator for that night was somebody that I could tell everybody was looking to, like, you're a great facilitator, you're leading us well, all this. I was like, they're going to nominate him. I wouldn't say yes to him. Uh-oh.
It's awkward.
And I don't want to give him the same title. Now, he's a great guy. He's just not in that spot where I'm like, I don't want to give you the same title as the person I invited, because I trust them and their trajectory and the way that they follow Jesus and the life they have to give away. I trust this person, and I don't trust that in them yet. Doesn't mean they can't get there, but I'm not ready to call them the same thing. And so I launched all of those groups with no leader. They just have, everybody walked out of Group Launch with a role, but it was like facilitator, hospitality, host, all these different things. And then the leadership process isn't now necessary for the group to run. It's just like a meta function. I hope this is making any sense, because this is really brand new.
Good word, meta function.
I know. I was pretty excited about it.
I'm looking that up later.
It's not real, but it sounds good. But the idea was like, if your
Shared
group can
ownership.
run, and it'll be great, everybody has ownership of the group experience. But if you want to leverage your impact on your new friends, your influence with your new friends, apply to be a leader, get interviewed, and then we'll train and equip you to do that. But it doesn't mean you do more stuff. And that's been, so far, the reception has been really helpful, especially for the leaders I asked in, because then by the end of the 5 weeks, they realized, they were kind of thinking like, gear up, do all the stuff, got to do all the stuff, got to call the people, text all the people, make all the snacks, do all the things. And then by the end of it, they realized, oh, I just signed up to be a facilitator, but I'm also a leader. So what does a leader do? I'm like, you help people follow Jesus. I think that was the goal, right? So I'm trying to separate the logistics and the function of what I used to call a leader, which was do all the stuff and hope they commit eventually back to you, and like separate that out. Say if the group doesn't work, it's because they all didn't take ownership. You can feel responsibility over it, but it's not your deal. If they don't commit, they didn't commit. And you can't make them commit, but you can pursue them and help them take their next spiritual step. And that's kind of what I want you to focus on anyway. That's the new method. So it's literally trying to turn people in groups into leaders in their own groups. Because I also used to say, do you want to lead? I know you love your group, and I know you're the best person in your group besides the leader. Can you leave that group?
Yes, which is one common method.
No. Like, okay, but maybe in a month, then do you want to like leave your group of best friends that it's all working, and you want to leave that for people that you don't know and that you don't aren't committed to you? Like, no, I don't want to do that. Why would I want to do
that old method worked for 1 month in 1977.
Yeah, really.
And other than in the books, that method universally, it is
hard.
beautifully written
Okay, so the
in the
apprentice
books.
model is similar to that, Phil. So
That's exactly what that model is, and it's beautiful when it works. And who can say anything against it? It just doesn't work widely. Yeah. You have to be so missionally minded and mature in your faith, and most of us are in process. So I won't disparage anybody. It just is what it is. And most people, once they find community, are not going to want to leave that community.
Especially in our current culture.
I think it was true 40 years ago. I think as people, we don't change that much. I think that's just how that is. But it's the apprentice model is a lovely model, and where it works, then celebrate it and use it. But if that doesn't work in your church, I love that these two models that were just expressed, the host model and then the connection group model, both of them are tried and true, both work, and both work in different times in the seasons and lives of a church. And so I came into a church that was very fast growing in West Michigan, and we were stalled. We were growing like crazy on the weekends with attendance and not in our small groups. And so the small group pastor at the time was he was called to do something different. And so I was given the opportunity with another team of people to unblock the blockage, basically. And the senior pastor sat us down and said, basically, in between the lines, he said, fix it or I'll find people who will. That was more or less. It wasn't that brutal, but it was pretty well clearly articulated. We all knew we had to fix this. So we actually used that connection model, only we used a 2-hour event that I think Saddleback pioneered many, many years ago, where you choose your own leader after 2 hours or hour and a half of getting to know one another. And it is nerve-wracking, but it worked for that season. And then once we got enough kind of traction under us, then we were able to identify people that we were comfortable having lead. So we were doing more your model there at Mission, where it was people that we'd already identified who would lead, and we'd walk them through kind of a group building process and so forth. I think what's neat is that there's really a myriad of ways to help people get into groups and to find leaders for those groups. So some of it's kind of going, hey, can you host a thing? Some of it is, hey, we'll trick you, just show up and we'll do this. And some of it is just sitting down over coffee and going, I'd like you to try this out. What a current model that's popular once again is 8 or 10 week curriculum run, where people are handed a curriculum, and the church is sort of all in. It's an exciting material. And sometimes churches write it, sometimes they buy the material, and the idea is you're just signing up for some short-term thing. So the leader is signing up for a short-term thing, an 8-week or a 10-week commitment. And then at the end of it, the hope and prayer is the relationships are formed. The leader wants to keep going. That's how my wife and I just started our small group. We weren't even the leaders. We were just participants in it. And we did in the fall of last year. We were brand new to the church in the area. So we had about a dozen or so people in this group. We were going through some material. And once that material wrapped up, as it turned out, we liked each other. And so Karen and I signed up to take the group on. And the other folks that were sort of like the short-term leaders, they were called to do something different. And so we have continued on with that group, and the relationships are forging. I think part of it is we have to remember when it comes to small groups, we're not dealing with brain surgery, rocket science. This is, what's the term? Spiritual friendships. You know, this is just, can you open up your house, have some light conversations, read a little scripture, talk about it, and pray for one another. If you can't do that, we shouldn't try to make you a leader. But if you can do that, you probably can lead a group at some elementary level. Mark, were you going to say something?
Yeah, when you were talking about some of the, leaders that you guys stepped into that role, one of the things that we started doing is, the apprentice model, I agree with you. That is such a challenge. So what I started doing, I started thinking, okay, we've got some really great leaders, and they have a heart for leading people. They get the vision. So I started going to them and saying, hey, would you consider stepping out of your group that you've been with for a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, and start a new group? Because they loved it at the beginning. And so we started presenting that, and a number of leaders were like, yeah, thanks for asking, because they were just looking for that ask. And I thought, this is a good way to start new groups with great leaders, and that whole group stays together. They've already know each other, so they're sending out somebody, but it's the main leader, and they're already enthusiastic about it. And so that was just kind of another thing I stumbled upon thinking about, and it's actually been something that has been very fruitful.
It keeps the group fresh too, because then that leader, a lot of times that is such a good way to do it, because if you don't do that, that group will dissipate because the leaders are looking for a new challenge. So that group will probably either plateau or fall apart. Giving the leader a new challenge allows new leaders to emerge, creates 2 healthy groups out of one.
And you know what you're getting.
You do,
because they're great there, and they have that heart. They already have that missionary heart. And
part of that's been a win for us as well. What's kind of cool about that one is you can take a seasoned leader who's terrific, and they've been leading their group maybe for several years, but now their season of life has maybe shifted, and we had some of these leaders that kind of had started having adult children, and they were empty nesting. Now their availability had shifted, and they were just interested in doing something different, and so we had a lot of young families that had kind of joined the church, and they wanted more mentorship, wanted not so much a peer relationship, but wanted kind of an older mentor couple. How do you do marriage? How do you do parenting? And so some of these leaders, I didn't want to lose them because over time they're ready, as Bill said, for a new challenge. And so we invited them to be like a mentor couple small group. So kind of custom created a small group, another one related to grandchildren and what those issues were. And they got excited again because it was a fresh group with a target purpose, which made them feel like, okay, now there's another growth piece. And because real leaders want to keep growing. That's kind of how you know you'll have one. So I think if any way we can kind of spark that again in people to go plant new groups, that helps a lot. I think another thing we had talked about a little bit ago was the idea of when someone leaves the group, like Bill, you joined the initial group and then the leader left and then you joined them. I think that's an easy one too, where someone in the group, because we have a lot of transition, people moving in and out of the area or whatnot, or they're doing other ministries, to then invite somebody else in the group to step up to that level of leadership. But the danger, Mark and I were having this conversation a little bit ago, the danger is sometimes you don't want to pick that person that the small group leader has identified. So what do you guys do when someone either self-selects and says, hey, I want to be a leader? This is why we never want to do the announcement from the platform, because you get some interesting people. Or their leader says, hey, John would be a great leader. I'm leaving, but, make him the leader. And the group's already bought in and you come into the picture and you're like, no, this isn't a good idea. Like, how do you guys handle that?
A couple of different ways. The coward's way out is just let gravity take its course, because usually if you feel that way, because they don't seemingly have the qualities or capabilities of leading, usually the whole thing will fall apart. Either the character of the person will reveal itself and people won't want to be in their group, or the group will die. And I've seen that happen more than once. But that's really the pastoral work of engaging in relational conversation. We have to be clear why we feel they shouldn't lead. Is there a moral or spiritual qualification issue? Is there just a temperament issue? Or we have to also do a little soul searching. Is this just a preference, like as in, I wouldn't want to be in their group, so they probably shouldn't lead? And if it's that one, we have to humble ourselves and realize, well, maybe someone wouldn't want to be in our group. Maybe they will be great with their group, and that's okay. So if that's just a preference thing, we should let that one go. But if it's a spiritual qualification issue, then it's incumbent upon us to do the pastoral work, and then we have to lovingly, as Paul would say in Galatians 6:1, is that the spiritual leaders should go to that person in humility and go and talk to that person. I'm presuming at that point the reason we wouldn't want them to lead is we know something that hasn't revealed itself, in which case that's what we have to do, is have that conversation with that leader about that matter. But again, I just reiterate, if this is just a preference thing, we're like, well, they just dominate conversation. Well, we can let them try it, and maybe the group will be cheerful about being dominated, or they'll learn and
or we don't
temper
put people
themselves
into their group. Or we put other controls on it, or sometimes we say not yet. We have a little bit of a waiting period when someone joins our church right away. We want them to get to kind of be there and get to know the culture and dive in their own pace. So even though they've led groups in their old church or whatever, we put them in a file, like you said, Mark. We keep tabs on them, but we want to just give them that time just to get settled. And sometimes that's hard because we need leaders and we want to employ them right away. But it's always usually paid off. When we've given them space and time, or we've allowed people to step off, has paid off. So what are some other negative things you're like, gosh, this went really well? Or the spirit of vulnerability, Tommy, where things didn't go so well in terms of recruiting and deploying new leaders?
She mentioned your name, Tommy. I mean, you're
I have to talk.
While Tommy's thinking, I just on this happened once when we were doing our sort of what we always called point and shoot. It was, they'd meet each other, and after 2 hours, they'd point at the person that they wanted to have lead. Well, we did this one night, and the couple that was chosen, unbeknownst to even us that were leading the process, were going through serious marital issues.
Oh.
Created a vulnerable moment where the group, literally that couple went, we really shouldn't lead because we came in here for help, not to lead other people. We're having marital issues. That's why we're here.
Wow.
Someone else was chosen to lead the group. It did. Now that's best case scenario. I'll admit.
Amazing.
Those are like sermon illustrations. But it readily comes to mind that we also have to recognize Holy Spirit's part of the process.
Yes.
So Tommy, have you had enough time to think to answer the question?
I guess so. Yeah, I think the big thing is when I've asked people in specifically, and it's just been a yes or a no for them. There's no next step for them. Like if I ask somebody to apply now, there's a process that they have to go through, and they don't just go like, yes, because you need me. Like, well, that's not going to last us very long, right? Like, that's not going to help. I want you to want to do this. I want it to be an aspirational thing also for you. I don't want leadership from you.
Right.
I want leadership for you. And that's been the biggest problem that I've run into is I keep asking for leadership from people.
Yes, that's a really good distinction.
And so what I've tried to fix in that is go like, I want this for you, and I need to make it so good and so inviting that you desperately want to get trained, get equipped, get support, get accountability for the right thing too, not just to run a great group, but to help your friends. Like I want you to be able to influence people. That's what a leader does, because leadership is influence. Leadership isn't good logistics. You can manage a group just fine. A lot of people can, but I want you to lead people, not even just a group. I want you to lead people. And so I've over and over asked people for leadership, like from them, and I'm trying to ask it for them now. Like, hey, I see this in you, and I want to help fan the flame of what God's doing in your life so that you can give it away and know how to give it away to other people. I've not cornered the market on that. Or
That's a
figured
great
it out.
distinction, though.
But it's helped me change my thinking a lot. And also,
Yes.
I'm not asking as many people. I'm asking them if they're ready. Hey, do you think you're ready to apply? Or do you think, is that something you want? Do you want to, and I start going like with the outcome. Do you want to be the best person you can for the people around you? Do you want to?
Who's going to say no to that, right?
Right, yeah. You're like, oh, I do. I have a.
That's quite
helpful,
a sales.
I think I can help. Like, I think I can guide you there. Not, I really need something from you so that my numbers look better. Right. That's kind of what I was saying before. They need you. So that,
somehow desperation never really is all that attractive.
No, it's really not.
It's not in dating. It's not in recruiting leaders. I think when it's about, we need people, I think there's a way to massage. I love that distinction. I've turned the corner and tried to say, there's people in our church, there's people in our community that need Jesus. And you have some skills and you have a maturity for that. Would you invite as a more of an invitational versus oh my gosh, we're so desperate, we're hurting, or sign on a dotted line. Guilt and shame are never great motivators. Jesus compels us with his love. And so we try to do the same, but you got to almost be really conscious, like you're saying, Tommy, of making that shift to be invitational versus what's the other option? I mean, it's how you get guilted into the PTA. I mean, there's another piece.
And I'm probably, this is where early on in ministry, I could sell somebody to be a small group leader and close the sale. I like selling. I like the challenge of getting them to say yes. And the problem with that was I would get them to say yes, but they were saying it yes for all the wrong reasons.
To you, probably.
To me.
Right.
Because, Pastor Mark is asking me to be a small group leader. So they felt obligated, guilted into it, and they didn't have time to pray about it, think about it. So what I've done, and it's really helped me, is if someone gives me a name of even of a person I don't know, and we have a process too, they can fill out an application, but I want to meet with them, I want to talk with them, and I tell them up front, I'm not here to get a yes or no right now. I says, I don't want that. As a matter of fact, I want to wait at least 2 to 3 weeks so you can have time to pray about it, think about it, because this is a big commitment. And if God's calling you, then you cannot help but do it. But if you're doing it because of me, that guilt will last till you get to the car, and then you're going to not like me anymore. And so guilting people into ministry, I think we all have been guilty, and it's easy to do because we're looking for those warm bodies. And I don't think in the long run, that's not sustainable. And so that's something that I've tried to say, okay, God, I'll let you get them to do it.
Just thinking, looking at the New Testament to cut ourselves some slack, the New Testament's full of messy churches because they were dealing with the resources and people available at the moment. And so in ministry, there's seasons of desperation where you do guilt trip, because there's some divine qualities to that, and yet there are also seasons ideally where you're able to plan ahead, plant seeds, watch the fruit grow and harvest it. And so I think that when we look at the scriptures, we certainly see there are some leadership situations where it's desperate times and you're grab and hold. The deacons, if you look at how they appointed the deacons in the 6th chapter of Acts, they basically just go, y'all decide who should do this. And they decided. Right. And then if we're always worried about, we might appoint a leader who doesn't work out, Jesus appointed Judas. And
good point.
That one didn't work out. So, if we can let ourselves be free from the perfectionist trap that we have to find just the right leader and do it in just the right way. There are different seasons that come and go where we have to respond according to the need at hand. So I think we all should have a plan A that we prefer, and then in given situations, then in sort of Holy Spirit desperation, we go, Lord, we hope I'm doing the right thing here, but this is what we need now.
And this is a good time of the year, as we're thinking, even the fall. What we wind up doing is we go to our existing group leaders and say, hey, who do you see that's rising up that could potentially be a group leader of their own? And so we're already getting those names. We'll start sending them hey, I'd love to talk with you about it. And it's far off, but it's something that, like you said, Bill, is we get desperate. It comes August. Oh man, I need some leaders. It's
Right.
now when we need to start planning for September for that launch. And so it's thinking out there as well.
But I do appreciate, and this is a great place for us to end, I do appreciate, Bill, your encouragement that there are seasons. So there are going to be times that we're going to try a host model because we need leaders fast. We may try, the connection model. We may try the point and pick model. There's lots of models out there, and for different seasons, different contexts, different churches, it's going to work. And it won't always work every single time either, but to kind of pray through that. And I love the conversation towards the end. We talked about just, I think we get so wrapped up in our own desire to, not so much for the numbers as it is just, we want to do well. I think at our heart, we want to connect people and we want groups to flourish. And so when we get out of the way and allow the Holy Spirit to do his part, my prayer at every fall and every January is, God, these are your people. Remember, I have to constantly remind myself. Now, it's not like God doesn't know that there's people. I have to remind myself, this congregation, these are your people, the people signing up for small groups. There's too many of them for the number of leaders we have. Again, your people, you're the shepherds. So you need to provide leaders for you. So I just put it back on God to provide. And it keeps me more humble and more free to not coerce or manipulate or sell, and instead allow the Holy Spirit to do the persuading. And every single time he provides what we need. And so, but every time I panic. So we just kind of go through this lovely little cycle, me and Jesus. But thank you guys so much for your input. This is such an important topic and hopefully was helpful. All three of these guys are active in the small group network. And in fact, what huddle are you guys part of? So you lead a huddle in Minnesota.
The North Central.
The North Central.
In the
Okay.
Twin Cities.
Okay. And Tommy, you
It's
lead.
a really long name, but it's Ventura County and around Ventura
So
County.
we do, okay, so I'm in Tommy's huddle. So we have Santa Barbara, we have Ventura, all the way out to North LA. So it's kind of a wide range. And then Bill, are you involved with a huddle?
I'm going to join yours. That sounds
Come join-
fantastic.
It's all over.
LA
It's
to
pretty fun.
Ventura and
You can
Santa
join us.
Sit on
Barbara.
the beach.
It doesn't matter that I'm in Oklahoma. I'm
mountains.
joining yours.
We'll put the screen up and you can join right along with us. But these guys are active on our Facebook group. So if you want to connect with them or ask questions and just continue the dialogue, and please, we're more than welcome to. So thank you so much for being on Group Talk, and thank you all for listening. So God bless you and your ministries. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk Network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.